What went wrong with Anthem? Ever since the launch of BioWare's new online loot shooter, fans have been asking just how it turned out to be so mediocre. The game felt buggy, repetitive, and never quite rewarding enough to justify its grindy missions. It seemed like BioWare hadn't paid much attention to the mistakes made in the past by games like Destiny and The Division. Today, it seems like there's a new complaint every day about the loot system, the overall design, and the glitches. I'm Jason Schreier, news editor at Kotaku, and for the past couple of months I've been investigating the story behind Anthem's development. I've interviewed 19 people who worked on the game, all of whom spoke anonymously because they were not authorized to talk about their work, and a clear picture has emerged from those conversations. Here's the sort of short version. Anthem was a game plagued by indecision, mismanagement, and technical issues, thanks to the Frostbite engine that EA Studios used to make games. There was tension between BioWare's two studios in Edmonton and Austin, resentment towards leadership, and lots of departures, as dozens of veteran developers have left BioWare over the past 2 years. Technically, Anthem was in development for more than 6 years. In reality, the game that came out was built in the last 18 months. Let's go back in time. It's 2012. Mass Effect 3 has just come out, marking an end to the popular sci-fi trilogy. BioWare announces that Mass Effect director Casey Hudson and his leadership team are now going to work on a brand new world, a new intellectual property built from the bottom up with all new gaming technology. It was envisioned as an online action game, one in which you'd explore a hazardous planet that they called the Bermuda Triangle of the universe because alien spaceships would keep crashing there. You'd team up with your friends to go out on missions in the wilderness, and you'd be able to salvage resources to bring home and upgrade your gear. The developers built all sorts of wild prototypes, like procedurally generated creatures and dynamic weather, some of which you can see in the teaser trailer from E3 2014. Then, in late 2014, Casey Hudson announced that he was leaving BioWare, which left a massive void in Anthem's leadership that proved difficult to fill. Those who have worked for BioWare have described the Mass Effect team as the Star Trek Enterprise, laser-focused and following the orders of a single commander. With Casey Hudson gone, they no longer had their Jean-Luc Picard. A few months later, the problems started to emerge. The writing staff kept changing, which led to big story reboots. Some of the ideas that worked really well as prototypes didn't seem to scale up as well as the developers hoped. People who worked on Anthem say there was no clear vision from the new leadership team. Imagine for a second being one of Anthem's developers in that scenario. You have to make something completely new. A new series, new technology, new tools, new ideas. You have to create something from scratch. That's a difficult task for anyone, let alone a team of people who just lost their creative visionary. Sometimes the developers would be in a meeting arguing over some key decision, like how flying would work or what the alien Scar race would look like. They'd disagree about the fundamentals, and then the meeting would just end. Nobody stepped up to tell the team what to do. Here's what one BioWare developer who was there at the time told me. The root cause of all this was the lack of vision. What are we making? Please tell us. The recurring theme was that there was no vision, there was no clarity, there was no single director saying, this is how it all works together. And then there was Frostbite. Frostbite is a video game engine, or a collection of software that can be used to make games. A whole lot of people who have worked with Frostbite have a whole lot of complaints about it. In an interview with me, one developer called it Frostshite. Another told me Frostbite is full of razor blades. So why do so many people at BioWare hate Frostbite? Well, Frostbite was made by DICE, the EA-owned studio behind the Battlefield series. The Battlefield games, of course, are first-person shooters. That means that all of the engine's features and tools are built to make first-person shooters, which doesn't exactly play well with a third-person RPG or an online action game like BioWare wanted to make with Anthem. BioWare has been using Frostbite since Dragon Age Inquisition, and it's caused their developers all sorts of headaches. When talking to me about Anthem, BioWare developers would sigh or sadly laugh at the number of problems that Frostbite caused them, simply because it made everything take longer than it needed to take. Plus, BioWare's owner, EA, prioritized the studios that would make the most money. Sometimes BioWare programmers would work on FIFA. Other times, the central Frostbite team wouldn't have enough time to help out BioWare because they were working on more lucrative projects like FIFA and Madden. Not a lot got done on Anthem throughout 2015 and 2016, but the game was slowly gravitating towards a looter shooter like Destiny or The Division, or even a loot game like Diablo 3. It started to become less about survival and more about hunting for loot with your friends. By the beginning of 2017, the team had built a demo that few people were really thrilled about. People I talked to said EA executive Patrick Soderlund told them he was disappointed with the graphics and lack of innovation, and he asked them to build something new. For this new demo in the spring of 2017, the Anthem team redid their art and added flying, which had been removed from the game several times over the years. It was enough to impress Soderlund, and this demo eventually transformed into that demo we saw at E3 2017 when BioWare announced the game. Toward the end of 2017, some drastic things happened. BioWare boss Aaron Flynn left the studio. He was replaced by Casey Hudson, the original director of Anthem, who came back to become general manager of the whole studio. One of the first things Hudson did in the fall of 2017 was reboot Dragon Age 4. That version of the game had been in development for a little while under creative director Mike Laidlaw, who also left the company around then. This new version of Dragon Age 4, which was teased last year at the Game Awards, will be very different than that one. Anyway, during this reboot, Mark Dara, who is the executive producer of the Dragon Age franchise, moved over to Anthem. Executive producer at BioWare is a person who runs the team, who ultimately makes all the final decisions and ensures that the game gets out the door. So this was a big change for Anthem. Want to see something fascinating? Check out the credits for Anthem. See the name at the top? Mark Dara, who started on Anthem just a year and a half before it actually came out, gets top billing on the game, which says a lot about Anthem's development. Anyway, after all these changes, there was suddenly momentum to finish the game, and throughout 2018, the Anthem team started pushing and crunching to get something out the door. They finally had a vision of what the game could look like, although there were still lots of problems. The story kept changing, the mission design took forever to finalize, and Frostbite continued to be a serious issue. That period was when most of Anthem was developed. Here's a quote from one developer. They talk a lot about the 6-year development time, but really the core gameplay loop, the story, and all the missions in the game were made in the last 12 to 16 months because of that lack of vision and total lack of leadership across the board. Morale got pretty low for some developers who spoke to me during those final months, and some of them still have scars from the process. They've talked about going on stress leave, taking weeks or months off for their mental health. A whole lot of people left BioWare during Mass Effect Andromeda's and Anthem's development, including a lot of veterans. When Anthem finally came out in February of 2019, the developers expected a Metacritic score in the 70s. After all, that was what the mock reviewers they'd hired had predicted. Instead, when all was said and done, the Metacritic wound up at around a 55. Some BioWare developers say they were aware of the game's problems before it shipped. They just found that senior leadership wouldn't listen to them, or they didn't have time to fix things, or the servers were so unstable they couldn't test the game, or so much of the game was unfinished they couldn't actually play the whole thing. Within BioWare, there's a term called BioWare magic, generally used to refer to those final months of production where everything coalesces and transforms into a great game. For games like the Mass Effect trilogy and Dragon Age Inquisition, this process worked. In those final months, those games had turned from disastrous to fantastic. On Anthem, it didn't work. They didn't have enough time to truly make it great, and what BioWare shipped was a disappointment, a buggy, broken game that couldn't hold a candle to competition like Destiny and The Division 2. BioWare had codenamed the game Dylan, hoping they would make the Bob Dylan a video game, something that would be discussed and referenced for years to come. On that end, they may have succeeded, just not quite in the way they hoped. For more on Anthem's development, head to Kotaku.com for the full article.